Welcome everybody to our part one of our Ron Baker webinar, where we're talking about pricing on purpose. Now, Ron has written the book, Implementing Value Pricing, and today we're going to work through why you might not be ready to move to, which will be part two's webinar next month, breaking down the hurdles that might be stopping you from using timesheets as a way to price within your agency. So I'm going to pass to Ron, who has spoken all over the globe to agencies, businesses like yours that sell their services based on time and helped them to implement pricing on purpose. I'll pass across to you, Ron, and welcome.
Great. Thank you, Kathryn. And it's great to be here. Welcome, everybody. So we want to talk about pricing. And of course, you can't talk about that topic without talking about the timesheet. The two are inextricably linked. So I'm just going to dive right in and give you a little bit of an overview of what I'll be discussing, and certainly happy to take questions. And if you have questions, you can put them into the chat or the Q&A. And Kathryn, if you see them, feel free to interrupt me. I'm happy to take questions as we go. But I'd like to talk about the motivation for getting rid of timesheets. And I'd also like to talk about some of the hurdles and mitigating those hurdles, and also overcoming the 4 defenses. I'm going to share with you, there are 4 universal defenses for why professional firms of all stripes need timesheets. And I believe that we can kind of knock each one of those down and give you alternative and superior processes that you can implement that will actually do what timesheets purport to do, but don't actually do. So we'll talk about that. And then we can talk a little bit about the strategy. Should you stop timesheets at some point in the future, or just go cold turkey and turn them off? Or could you do it slowly, more gradually? And I'll give you a few ideas around that. And I'm sure Kathryn will as well. So let me give you the 4 defenses for timesheets. The first is that we need them for pricing. And if you know any agencies out there, and there are quite a few now, thanks to Tim Williams, and if you were at the webinar that Kathryn did with Tim Williams, then you've heard him talk. Tim has single-handedly converted more advertising agencies to value pricing around the world than anybody else I know. Just absolutely amazing. And more agencies are engaged in value pricing. And other offshoots of pricing, such as possibly just a fixed price or a project price, or even a price where you have some skin in the game and get some upside if things go well. So all of that can be, I put under the umbrella of value pricing. And therefore, since there are so many firms out there that are doing that, we know that you don't need timesheets for pricing. The second defense you'll hear is, well, we need timesheets to judge the efficiency of our people. And how would we tell what they're doing? How would we tell how busy they are? All of that. So I'm going to give you some ideas around that. And the other defense is we need them for project management. How would I know how a job was going, where it was in the pipeline, how much, if we had adequate capacity to do the job without tracking time? I'm going to give you some project management principles. And then the last one, and probably the most challenging for people to overcome, especially if you have any type of accounting, finance, MBA type background, is I need timesheets to do cost accounting. Well, why do we want to do cost accounting? Well, cost accounting was invented to set a price. I'm a former recovering cost accountant. I'm a recovering CPA. And I did a lot of cost accounting in my career that I repent for every day. But cost accounting was invented by engineers, not accountants. So first off, I don't know why we're so tied to it. But second, it was invented to come up with a price. And since that's not how we're coming up with a price, then my argument is we don't really need to do cost accounting. Plus, timesheets are rather poor cost accountants. So I'm going to give you some thought experiments around that. And hopefully we can get over all of these hurdles and give you some superior methods. So let's talk about pricing a little bit. I'm not going to go into too much depth here, but I think that hourly billing just requires a calculator, whereas I think value pricing requires some courage. It requires some competency. It requires you knowing what you're worth. One of the things I love about working with ad agencies is you folks help businesses build their brands. And one of the reasons for a brand is so the business can have more pricing power, right? We pay more for a branded drug, aspirin, than we do for a generic. And that's part of the magic that agencies bring to the table. And all we're saying is you need to bring it to your own business. Because if you look out there in corporate America, corporate world, if you look at Apple, if you look at Tesla, if you look at all these different leading edge companies, none of them are cost plus pricing, which is a derivative of, or hourly billing is a derivative of cost plus pricing. No sophisticated entity anymore cost plus prices. And so they have all adopted the principles of value pricing. And that's all we're trying to get the professional world to do, whether they're a law firm, accounting firm, an ad agency, actuarial firm, IT consultants. I'm happy to report, for example, that McKinsey and Company no longer hourly bills. Bain and Company no longer hourly bills. And by the way, they don't do timesheets either, because once they got rid of hourly billing, they realized that the timesheet was a superfluous measurement, that there are other things that we can look at. So we'll talk about that as well. So moving on to the second defense is we need timesheets to determine efficiency, either on an agency-wide basis or an organizational-wide basis, and or the individual team member. In other words, how would we know if team member A was more efficient than team member B? Well, folks, if you think about this, and it doesn't take much thought, because we've all done timesheets, we know that, let's just say people fudge on their timesheet. They borrow time, they pad time, they eat time, because they put down on the timesheet what they think the boss wants to see, not what actually happened. And of course, those errors don't cancel out. They just kind of carry over from project to project, and they're just not an accurate source. Plus, I would argue strenuously that they're not predictive of a successful professional in your industry. They don't predict the success of a CPA, a good CPA, a good lawyer, or a good ad person. They just don't. They're not predictive. What they are is a measurement of an input. And we do it because it's easy. But just because something's easy to measure doesn't mean that the resulting measure throws off anything of value. And so I'll give you a thought experiment. Can you name for me, if you think about all your employees, team members, and can you divide them into, and I'm not trying to be facetious here, but can you divide them into stars and maybe, ABC, let's just say that. Can you divide them into ABCs? Do you know who the stars are? Do you know who kind of the duds are? Without looking at any financial data. No timesheets, no book of business, nothing. Of course you can. Work with these people every day. You know their attitude. You know their commitment. You know their pride. You know their passion. You know their customer service ethic. You know all of these things. And by the way, all of these things, which are predictive of a successful knowledge worker, are not measured on a timesheet. They're completely silent. So I contend that you already know who is efficient in your agency and is not. And here's the other kicker with this. If they're inefficient, the question then becomes, is the timesheet data going to help them increase that efficiency? In other words, is it going to increase future performance of those team members? And obviously not, because it doesn't do that. It like its cousin here, which is the annual performance appraisal. The annual performance appraisal actually also does not improve future performance. which is why another revolution's been taking place in the corporate world, and that is the elimination of the annual performance review. I've lost track now of the number of companies that have completely eliminated the annual performance appraisal, such as Deloitte and Medtronic and Procter and Gamble, who practically have never had them. And there's a whole list. Adobe, it goes on and on and on of companies that have eliminated these things because we waste a lot of time and money doing them, a lot of resources, and they don't improve future performance. They don't do the one thing that they're tasked with doing. Timesheets are the exact same way. I can berate somebody for being 50 hours over budget. How does that help them improve? What does it tell me about why they were 50 hours over budget? The time doesn't give me any type of granular qualitative information to understand what went wrong in the process of doing the work, and therefore we went over. Because remember, at the end of the day, no matter how you price, I don't care if it's hourly, I don't care if it's a value, I don't care what your business model is. Any business has to get work through. It has to organize work, plan work, and get it through, move it through. And in order to do that, we should study companies kind of masters at that. Outfits like Toyota and Apple, these companies have very complicated supply chains. They do a lot of different types of work, a lot of moving parts involved, and they're just organizing work. Well, it's no different in a professional firm. We're all knowledge workers, and we're not working to the cadence and rhythms of a factory assembly line, but there are certain processes that we can follow to help us improve how work flows through our firm. So I don't buy that you need timesheets to determine efficiency. My main argument is you already know who the good people are and who the not so good people are, and who the ones that are improving. And another argument that defense of timesheets is we need them for project management. And this one has always kind of baffled me because project management, the big thing about project management is it looks at capacity forward looking. It doesn't look backwards on a timesheet. It projects capacity into the future and says, can we build this building and have it open on, in 6 months' time or 9 months' time? Can we get this bridge built so it can carry traffic on such and such date into the future? That requires them to project capacity into the future and work backwards towards it. It's much like FedEx tracking turnaround time. They know that when those planes come into their hub in Memphis, Tennessee, that they have to be unloaded, they have to be sorted, and they have to get back out onto the planes, repack those planes, and get those planes off. This all takes place, by the way, between 12 a.m. and 4 a.m. in the morning, 365 days a year they're doing this. And they have countdown clocks all over saying, hey, we've got 3 minutes until the Japanese flight needs to be out of here so we can make its target. In other words, what they're measuring is on-time arrival. Why do they measure that? Because that's what the customer cares about. We should measure what our customers care about. No customer cares about how many hours you put on a timesheet. They do care. Are they going to get their stuff when we promised it to them, or what the deadline was, or whatever it is? So project managers are more concerned with bottlenecks and constraints than they are about effort. How long did we spend on something? So project managers make a distinction between estimated effort and duration. So I'll give you an example. If I hand somebody in your agency a project and say, I think this should take about a day. So you could project hours. You could put on, if you have a tracking system, like a workflow system or a PM system, you could say, okay, I've given Joe an 8-hour project, right? So I've sucked up 8 hours of his future. Now, whether or not he spends 4 hours on that project, or 6 hours, or 8 hours, or 10 or 12, the project manager There's not too excited about that. That's effort. What he's more concerned about is, why is something that we estimated should take about 1 day, why did it sit in the agency for 3 weeks? Far from being first in, first out. This is more like fish, right? First in, still here. It's those bottlenecks that show where the constraints and where the bottlenecks are, usually at the top, by the way. The bottleneck is always at the top of the bottle, right? So we know who to blame. But the point is that there's a big difference between duration and effort. And one of the things that we can do is, just like FedEx, track turnaround time, hold people accountable every time you assign them a project or a portion of a project, that you give them a deadline. And you give them account so you can come up with an on-time delivery measure. And it's not, more leading indicator than a timesheet, because think about a timesheet for a minute. A timesheet, by the time you see something on a timesheet, it is by definition no longer manageable. You're crying over spilt milk at that point. How is that going to help us improve in the future? Whereas project managers, they kind of have to have some canaries in the coal mine, like somebody hitting their turn time, like FedEx has. FedEx has an entire war room that is set up because there's always a crisis. There's going to be weather that halts planes coming into airports, and they're going to have to land at an adjacent airport maybe and get trucks over there. There's something like that going on around the world at all times, and they deal with it in real time. They don't have the luxury of looking at a timesheet after the fact and, Monday morning quarterbacking it. They have to do it in real time, as do project managers. So it's really all about tracking turnaround time and duration, because to use, as we do, timesheets to do project management, it's kind of like timing your cookies with your smoke alarm. By the time you hear the smoke alarm, the damage has already been done. It's too late. The project's already gone south. Maybe the client's already upset because you didn't get it to them by the promised deadline, whatever it is. So project management, proper project management, is a requirement no matter how you price. By the way, it doesn't matter if you're hourly billing, value pricing, whatever. You're going to have to do project management, because project management is just about, how do we get work through the agency? How does work come in? How does it get assigned? And how does it get done? And, this is what companies like Toyota and BMW are really good at. They have engineers. It's not the finance people that are in the factory messing around with things. It's, production engineers that know how work can be arranged and cycled through. And we kind of need to view it like that. It's not a timesheet issue. It's how do we set up work and establish workflows and all of that. So proper project management has nothing to do with time. You won't find a certified project manager who cares about looking at timesheets. What they're all about is projecting that capacity into the future. And the last defense, which might be probably the most complicated to explain, but maybe not. I don't know. There's a million different ways to explain this and attack this. I'll just give you a couple. I'm going to share with you some books that if you're really interested in diving into this, you can get a hold of, that I think do a really good job talking about why cost accounting isn't what you think it is. And one of the people that's had a profound influence on me is H. Thomas Johnson, who happens to be an accounting professor. He's a PhD accounting professor at Oregon State, or Portland, I think, Portland University in Oregon. And he wrote a book called Profit Beyond Measure. Now, if you're not a finance person, maybe you've never heard of activity-based costing. But activity-based costing was founded because H. Thomas Johnson and his partner at the time were not happy with managerial accounting. And they had a book together that Harvard still claims is one of the top 14 best books ever written The Fall and Rise of Management Accounting. And out of that study of why internal accounting wasn't serving businesses very well, they came up with activity-based costing. So H. Thomas Johnson is legitimately one of the fathers of activity-based costing. And he was speaking at a conference about activity-based costing, and somebody came up to him and said, "Have you ever studied Toyota?" And he said, "No." And he said, "Do you know Toyota does not use any form of standard cost accounting in their business?" And Johnson looked at this guy and he said, "That's hard to believe." And the guy says, "Well, you should check it out. You should have a meeting with them. They're located in Kentucky in the U.S. They have a plant there." And Johnson, being a curious, intellectually curious fellow, he went and he started talking. He says, "Is it true?" And he ran across this controller who gave him kind of the whole history of the company. He said, "This company has never done cost accounting in its entire existence, even when it was making weaving machines in the 1890s when it was founded, long before automobiles." And Johnson just couldn't believe it, because here's a guy who's studied accounting his whole life, and he just couldn't fathom that you could have a company as successful as Toyota and as innovative and profitable. And at the time, it had a market cap that was bigger than GM, Ford, and Chrysler together. And he studied them. He hung out in their factories for 2 or 3 years. And this book, Profit Beyond Measure, is the result of that study. And it's a seminal work, because in it, he says you can use accounting to describe a business's external condition, but it offers little insight into the particular interrelationships that determine those results. In other words, the work that we do, the relationships we have with our clients and our vendors and all the other people that we work with, photographers or people that you outsource jobs to, all of those are a web of interdependent relationships. And to think that you can look at the outcome through that you see on accounting reports and glean some type of granular enough information that you could change those numbers, it's like thinking that you can do an autopsy on a dolphin and learn something about it as opposed to swimming with it, because we're talking about a live entity. I mean, the accounting report, for all intents and purposes, it's kind of like an autopsy. That's why the joke about accountants, they come in after the war and bayonet the wounded, because they're showing you what happened last month or last year. They're historians with lousy memories, and they can't explain. I mean, yes, we can audit the drunk's bar bill. I can tally up his bar bill and tell you what he spent his money on. What I can't tell you as an accountant is why he's an alcoholic. That requires a little bit of psychology. It requires some qualitative assessment and some conversations. Accountants they don't have that capability. It's not in the skill set. So the other problem with cost accounting, and again, this is pretty high level stuff, but if you're interested, again, I'm going to give you some resources that you can look at. But generally accepted accounting principles have different sanctioned cost accounting methods. Here's just some of them. These are the most popular. There's 6 different cost accounting methods. And you wouldn't be surprised to know that depending on which one you pick, even within your agency, you will get a different cost per hour or per unit or whatever it is that you're measuring. It's usually per hour. All of these will result in a different number. Folks, that's not a measurement. That's a metric. Metrics are determined by how we decide to arrange things, what assumptions we make. A measurement, you and I go outside with a thermometer, and if they're good thermometers, we'll probably get the exact same measurement on each of our thermometers. But an accountant, given the same set of numbers and told to use different cost accounting methods or different inventory valuation, you may know of LIFO and FIFO, those will also throw off different cost of goods sold, different net incomes, different unit costs. And you got to ask yourself, how could it do that? If accounting is so precise, if it's a measurement, how could it throw off different numbers? Well, because it's not a measurement, it's a metric. And it depends on what assumptions you make about flows and how you're going to allocate things and all of these technical things I'll bore you with. Suffice it to say, because we'll get different numbers, I love to quote this Lee Segal law that says a man with one watch knows what time it is, but a man with two watches is never quite sure. And that is certainly true with cost accounting. So, but let me try and hit this head on and give you an idea of why why timesheets are lousy cost accounting. First off, your hourly rate, whatever that is, includes profit. Folks, cost accountants don't say anything about profit. They allocate costs, not profit. And so there's no relationship to your hourly rate and your firm's actual costs. So I'm going to give you a numerical example of this, a very simple one. But the bottom line is your hourly rate has nothing to do with your agency's costs. I know we think it does, but it doesn't. I know of no professional firm who's ever sat down with their P&L and looked at the costs and then divided that by the actual number of hours that they built and got an actual cost per hour. Never seen it, because hourly rates are usually determined based on market considerations. Do we want to be the most expensive agency in the region, or the least, or the one somewhere in the middle? Whatever, has nothing to do with cost. So the other problem is, think about kind of how absurd it is to run a P&L on every hour that we operate. We have this knowledge firm, we have these interdependent relationships, and we honestly believe that we can break it down to every single hour, like allocate your rent to every hour, allocate the toilet paper that's used to every hour, let alone client. But I mean, it's kind of absurd when you think about it. And I blame my profession for foisting this on people, this mindset, because it's a terrible mindset. It doesn't depict economic reality. Also, the timesheet and the hourly rate and value pricing and cost per job, cost per customer doesn't account for the lifetime value of the customer. We look at the math of the moment, literally, but we don't consider the lifetime value of the customer. And that's a big mistake, because we're in a relationship business, and loyalty and customer loyalty has a big impact on profit. Also, timesheets can't answer the most important question that pricers ask, which is, how much money did we leave on the table today? In other words, if we charge somebody $50,000 for a campaign and they gladly paid it, could we charge them 60, 70? Because if I did leave $10,000 or $20,000 on the table, you know what? It's not going to show up in my timesheet accounts. It's not going to show up on my realization reports. It's not going to show up on my financial statements, my P&L. It's just going to disappear into the air. Actually, it's in the client's pocket. It's on their income statement. They got much more value than they would have been willing to give up, the price that they were willing to pay. And the timesheet doesn't help us become better pricers, because it can't answer that question. It can't answer number 5 there. The other fallacy with timesheets is it assumes that time equals value, because that's our hourly rate, and we spent 5 hours, whatever our hourly rate is, that's the price that we should charge the customer. But that says nothing about value to the customer. That's why value pricing is more outward looking, and it's a more sophisticated and more optimal pricing method. But also, looking inside the firm, timesheets assume that time is cost. So if you're paying somebody, and I'm just making up numbers here, but if you're paying somebody $100,000, you figure, well, a full-time employee is 2,000 hours a year, or 2,080, whatever it is, and you take that $100,000, you divide it by 2,080, and then it gives you a cost per hour. And yes, I can allocate that cost per hour over the number of jobs and customers they work with. But folks, I don't care how you allocate it. If you've hired that person at 100 grand, your cash is 100 grand, whether or not you can charge them out or whether or not they're doing eBay auctions all day. It doesn't matter. What you pay them has nothing to do with how they are utilized. So dividing up their pay by the hour, and this would include your rent, your technology costs, allocating that out by the hour is kind of pointless because in other words, if you didn't allocate a job to that person, would you save those 20 hours? No, you'd still pay the 100 grand. So it doesn't do much good. So time is actually not value. Time is not a cost. You don't pay your employees for the time they spend with you any more than your customers are paying you for the time it takes you to do their work. They don't care about that. Nobody cares how long it took Toyota to build their car. Nobody even asks, right? Because they're buying the result. I mean, marketers know this. You know, you buy the hole, not the drill bit or the drill. Time is actually just a constraint. And the problem with the billable hour, and I think the timesheet keeps us mired in the mentality of the billable hour. That's why I think the timesheet is the real problem here. But the problem with it is time is a constraint. Apple is subject to the same 24 hours a day that we are. Bill Gates was subject at Microsoft to the same 20. We all get the same amount of time. The difference is those companies don't have a business model that limits their income based on time. We limit our income. The only way to make more money is, Tim likes to say, in the $1 million with the billable hours is to bill 1 million more hours. That's crazy. There's no leverage in the billable hour. So you got to start thinking of time as a constraint. The other thing is the opportunity cost. This is another big argument that I get from the agents, certainly the financial people, some CFOs, whatever. They'll say, look, we need to know if we're making an opportunity cost, and our hourly rate is an opportunity cost. And I agree. I'm an economist. I love opportunity costs. Every choice we make has an opportunity cost. You're here today on this webinar, but you could be at the beach right now, or you could be golfing, or you could be doing work or landing a new customer. You've made a choice to be here. But here's the thing about opportunity cost. It has to be assessed before you make the decision. If you've already made the decision and then look on a timesheet to see how you did, you're not analyzing opportunity cost at that point. You're analyzing a sunk cost. And sunk costs don't matter. So it's really a category error to think that the timesheet and the billable hour give you any clue as to opportunity cost. And I think one of the ways that you can mitigate this is to have minimum prices. Don't take on a customer below a certain price, and that will at least give you some idea that you're not giving up better opportunities somewhere else. The opportunity cost won't be as uncertain if you have minimum prices. And then here's the real kicker with this is that services and customers really don't have costs. Organizations do, right? I mean, you have rent and you have technology and you have human capital that you pay. And yeah, that's somewhat depending upon your number of customers. I get that. But the fact of the matter is, those aren't tied to any one customer. We lose customers all the time. We don't get engagements, whatever. And with cost, you would have to recalculate those allocations every customer came on board and every time a customer left. But your rent is going to stay the same. Your salaries are going to stay the same, at least in the short and medium run. Now, look, in the long run, all business costs are variable because we could close the doors and just walk away and zero out the costs. Really, if you think about it, organizations have costs, not customers and services. And then probably the biggest, one of the biggest is timesheets don't help you improve future performance. And I think after action reviews do that. So I want to talk a little bit about AARs before we go. But Let me give you a very simple thought experiment. I've tried to keep this real simple. Let's just say you're a one-person agency. You're just a solo, no employees, not even a PA, just one person. You've got $100,000 overhead. Maybe you have a nice office somewhere, got some technology, some other, things that you subscribe to, whatever it is. And you think that you're going to work 3,000 hours in a given year. But you think based on, only about 1,500 of that is going to be billable. So the first question, folks, is your overhead's 100. So that's your real cost. Should you divide it by the 1,500 or the 3,000? See, this is where we get into the difference between metrics and measurement. Both of those answers are okay. And in fact, would be okay under some of those different cost accounting methods I showed you. But it really kind of makes a difference. Now, a CPA, if there are any CPAs out there, they would say, well, you divide by the number of billable hours, not total hours, because the other 1,500 hours you're doing admin work and maybe, professional development and, rainmaking and all of that. Okay, so let's divide it by 1,500. So our real cost is about $67 per hour. Now, let's say you come to November 30th of the year and you've done your 1,500 hours and you're done. You've hit your by November. So you've only got 1 month of the year and you figure, well, maybe I'll just take it off and enjoy the holidays. But then a client walks in first and gives you a project for 100 hours. Now look what happens. You would have to divide that 100,000 by 1,600, lowering the cost by about $4 per hour. That means that we've overassigned costs, $4 an hour for every client that came before this guy who did on December 1st. Now, expand this out to a bigger area where you have clients coming and going, you have team members coming and going. Tell how useful any of this stuff is. It's not useful at all because, again, you're going to pay those costs irrespective of how you utilize them, how you utilize your labor, your technology, and your rent, which are usually the three biggest costs. And I don't even want to get into, what if you divided by the 3,000 hours? How would you allocate the other 1,400 non-billable at that point? I mean, see, this kind of gets crazy. This is one of the reasons accountants like it, because they get paid to make these senseless calculations. But this in no way helps you become a better pricer. It helps you in no way do the work better, to organize the work better. It doesn't do any of that. It's just a bunch of metrics that are quite frankly meaningless and can actually be quite dangerous. Now, if you're interested in learning more about this, these are the 4 books that I highly recommend. I bet a lot of you have already read The Goal by Elihu Goldratt, and it's one of the best-selling business books of all time. And it's all about the theories of constraints. If you go on YouTube and you find some lectures from Goldratt, you'll find that he dislikes cost accounting more than I do. He has terrible things to say about it. He's a physicist. So anybody who understands math understands that cost accounting is really poor math because you can get different answers by making different assumptions. Profit beyond measure, which we've already talked about. And then my colleague, full disclosure, Dr. Reginald Lee, who's a fellow at VeraSage, but he's a fellow because I found this guy and I just couldn't believe how he actually articulated what I had trouble for years articulating in 2 books that he wrote, the first being Lies, Damn Lies, and Cost Accounting, and the second being Strategic Cost Transformation, which I wrote the foreword to. What he says in these books is rather than modeling cost accounting or activity-based cost account or activity-based costing, you need to be modeling cash flow. Cash is king. Cash is what matters. And cost accounting has nothing to do with cash. Nothing. Because it's just looking at costs and then making all these weird assumptions about how it's allocated, but it has nothing to do with cash. Whereas when that payroll falls due every day, I don't care if your people are billable or not. That payroll's due. The cash has got to go out the door. So he wants you to model cash. And I think it's a much saner way to run a business. So what replaces cost accounting? What replaces timesheets? Take a look at all of these things. Value-based pricing, which is talked about, and which I've talked about as well, and we'll talk more. Also, business model change. If you from hourly to value pricing, you're actually making a business model change, not just a pricing change. If you establish a value council in your firm or a chief value officer, as some firms have, pricing teams, sometimes they're called pricing councils or value councils. They're called different things, but basically, if you think about it, it makes sense to have a group of people dedicated to studying pricing, constantly testing pricing, constantly developing their pricing and improving it, because the pricers are kind of like what agents are for actors and authors. Why do actors and authors have agents? It's not because they like to pay them % of their gross revenue. It's because these people can get them higher prices for their movies, their books, or their TV shows, whatever it might be, because I believe that there's an inherent limitation with all of us. We're not good at selling ourselves. I'm incredible at selling other people. I can sell Kathryn. I'll be brave as a lion with her prices, but I'm not going to be able to do that with myself. I'm going to feel braggadocious, whatever. And that's why we need pricers. They're kind of like a spine. They make sure that we get paid what we're worth. And there's great nobility in that. And therefore, that's why so many companies now have pricers on board to help them do that. They've kind of taken it away from the salespeople, because think about it. What's the best way to make a sale? You cut the price. Well, just like marketers are there to protect brand integrity, right? Think about how well you protect the brand's integrity. Pricers are there to protect the pricing integrity. And this is why you don't see sales at Apple or sales at Porsche. Their pricers are not going to do that because they know that would degrade their brand and their price integrity. The is that capacity and cash flow modeling is another thing that replaces the timesheet. Proper project management, as we talked about. Key predictive indicators, one of which is the turnaround time. That's a predictive indicator, just like FedEx uses it every single day. And then another big one, which I will close on, is the after action review. And this is a concept borrowed from the military. And I ran across this in the early 2000s. So I've been preaching about this for a long time. Come to find out, as I've studied it more and talked to more people in the military, it originated in the Navy and the Army, from what I can tell in the United States, but I'm not 100% sure. But what I do know is that every military in the world uses it, except North Korea, I'm not sure. Russia, I'm not sure either, for that matter. But every military uses the after action review. They call it different things, like maybe debrief or lessons learned, but the Army calls it an after action review. And it's a fantastic way to capture the tacit knowledge inside your firm. A lot of professional firms in the 80s and 90s went after knowledge management. They said, well, gee, if we could capture just a portion of what people know in their heads, all that tacit knowledge that we have, and put it somewhere where others could reuse it and access it when they needed it, we'd be far more effective. We wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel all the time, because we would always know how to do something because, hey, somebody in our organization's done it before. Well, the Army's the same way. The Army's got a great saying: they never want to build the same bridge twice. So they do these after action reviews, and this started in the post-Vietnam War era, and AARs were implemented as a way to increase morale. But what they found after doing these things for about 16 years was that not only did they increase morale and not cause dissension in the ranks, but they actually increased knowledge and troop and combat effectiveness as well. And so they stuck with it. And now it's just part of their culture that they do after action reviews. The after action review is very simple. The Army will assign a project, a mission, whatever, go build this type of bridge. Maybe it's a transport bridge so I can take tanks and, get trucks across with supplies or whatever. And of course, the platoon that goes out there with the Army manual to build this bridge is going to see how to build it, and it's going to have the instructions, but it's not going to have all that little tacit knowledge, the tips. No, don't use that hinge, use this hinge. No, don't weld it that way, weld it this way, because it takes too long for the manual to be updated. And so there's all these little tricks of the trade that you learn. It's like an apprentice and a journeyman, right? You have all these little tricks of the trade. That's all the tacit knowledge. And this is why there's still medical schools. I mean, this tacit knowledge is very, very expensive to transfer because it's very high bandwidth. It's not low bandwidth like reading a book or looking at a PowerPoint presentation. It's very high bandwidth. And so after that bridge is built, the platoon who worked on it, everybody from the colonel to the private come in and they do an after action review. And the Army's got very specific guidelines on it. They've got very specific timing on it, no longer than 50 minutes. And it's essentially 4 questions. What was supposed to happen on this mission? What were the objectives? And then what actually happened out there, what the Army calls the ground truth, right? Because as Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until you're punched in the face. And then there's always a gap between what we expected and what actually happened. So there's positive things that come out of that probably, and there's negative things that come out of that. And then the last question is, what have we learned and how can we do it better next time? Now, in the old days, in the 70s, they used to have a scribe. That person would type up this report, not like a court reporter, but close, identify everybody who's talking. And then these things would get filed. That way, when a platoon on the other side of the world was assigned to build the same bridge, the first thing they did was not go out and build the bridge. The first thing they did was they went to the manuals and they studied AARs for that type of bridge. And when they did go out, do you think that made them more efficient, but also more effective? It actually improves performance as you go because you're constantly learning and adjusting. And that's why the Army to this day is absolutely fanatical. I know the Air Forces around the world, if you have a flying team, they use AARs after every air show they do. And those AARs are 4 hours. We talked to one of the commanders of the space shuttle. After the space shuttle landed, they didn't do a 4-hour after action review. They did an 11-day after action review, 11 days. They went over the entire mission. Apparently they watched the video, kind of like sports teams. And so this is a phenomenal learning tool. So I provided Kathryn with a sample after action review agenda that me and my colleague Ed Kless kind of adapted from these Army 4 questions, but we kind of adjusted it for a knowledge organization. So it's in Word format. You can look at that. You can adjust it. But I am a big fan of after action review because they improve future performance. And folks, I think one of the big motivations for getting rid of the timesheet, not only does everybody hate them, not only do we know they don't really have good information, not only do we not make better business decisions, but they're an enormous cost. We spend a lot of time feeding the beast. And if you implement after action reviews, take the time that you save from doing timesheets and entering timesheets and studying reports from timesheets and put it into the after action review. And I think you'll see improvements in performance and you'll be able to get rid of the timesheet. And if you do annual performance appraisals, guess what? The after action review knocks those out as well. And I think what a great 2-for-1er here is get rid of the timesheet, but also get rid of the annual performance appraisal, because really what we're interested in is improving people's future performance, and the timesheet and the performance appraisal do neither. So with that, I know I've been going on and on, but happy to take questions, Kathryn, if we have them, or if you want to say anything about any of that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, look, how about we stop the slideshow and take some questions? I can see a couple in the chat already. So in the
Excellent.
Q&A, which is at the bottom toolbar for most on your screen, or it may be at the top, a floating toolbar, please type them in. I just really endorse what Ron is saying to us. And I'm going to put a challenge out there, because Ron, who is the founder of Vera Sage Institute, challenges businesses that are based on time, service industry, to dump timesheets in favor of pricing on purpose. And in particular, I think the Value Council is how you will do it in your business. We don't have any APAC agencies represented on the Vera Sage website as successful in this space. Ron also mentioned his colleague Ed Klaus. So together they have a podcast, which is The Soul of Enterprise. It's full of great interviews of businesses that have already done this. So again, I'd urge you to take a listen to some of those podcasts to motivate you to really, as I'm sure you're quite excited from today's session, to make it happen. One of the biggest takeouts for me was the ARRs and how FedEx used the countdown clock for when the turnaround that they have to deliver their packages on time. That just resonated so strongly with me, as it will with you and your businesses, because we're coming up to the end of month end. Which jobs should be delivered, should have passed their deadline date? Did you even have a deadline date? Or is it going to languish in the studio for another 3 weeks? These are the things, the change requests, that are really going to make the difference for you. And the fish analogy, first in, still here.
Still here. Yeah.
Classic. I want to see that on people's whiteboards. That's really it's still here. What's it still doing here? We said it would take a day. So focusing here, and it has nothing to do with let's have a look at the timesheets. It's just still here. What do we need to get it done for our beautiful clients? We made a promise to deliver. So this is not about, well, the timesheet said we can't go there. That is not an argument that they want to hear. Some of the questions that we had, and thank you very much for filling those out on your way in through registration, is when we have clients who are so wedged in with timesheets, or government clients. I saw a question come through where we have government clients that insist on the hourly rates and how long will it take. And I guess from my seat, and I'll pass to you, Ron, this happens all the time through procurement and requests for proposals, requests for quotations, because that's the model that the industry has been used to using, the easy way, forever, and it allows for comparison. I would advocate, and I do with all of the agencies I work with, is that you offer choice. So you can offer them that if they have to have that, but that's not what we want. We don't want that. We want them to look at, exactly as Ron said, look at the KPIs, look at the outputs, look at the turnaround time, the thing that's going to matter to them most. And this is where you need to be a bit courageous and have those conversations and sway them as you are potentially being swayed in this session here. What about you, Ron? How would you, I'd see the Army as a classic example against that question that government bodies that we work with want us to use hourly rates.
Right.
What are your thoughts, Ron?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Ali. And sometimes you're stuck. Sometimes you can't get the government to move off of hourly rates. And if you've decided to do that type of work, you're just going to get stuck paying by the hour. The firms and all different types of firms do obviously governmental work, accounting, lawyers, consultants. And the consultants, believe it or not, like McKinsey and Bain, somehow they get away from hourly rates because they become a preferred provider or something. Some of the strategies that we've successfully used is offer 3 options, like Kathryn was saying, to give them choice, and then they get to make the value price trade-off that's appropriate for them. And put a guarantee on your work. Tell them, hey, if you're not satisfied, only pay for the value you think you received. And that might get you noticed, and it might get you away from the hourly rate. Also, Kathryn mentioned my radio show, The Soul of Enterprise.com. We have an interview with the president of the Institute of Canadian Advertisers, ICA. And she was working on this very issue. How do we contract with government? How do we do RFPs? And that show talks about an RFP process that's being used successfully here in the United States and up in Canada for not just advertising agencies, but like engineering firms and architectural firms who are kind of in the same boat. And I forget the name of there's a white paper that she wrote with somebody else, but it's in the show notes. The link's all there, but I would highly recommend it. I don't know, I can't remember the show number, but it's with Leah Power. And if you go on to the souloфenterprise.com, click on the archive tab, you will see there's a Google space bar in there. You can type search and put Leah Power and she'll come up. And take a listen to that show and also check out her white paper. That might help you. But unfortunately, you may be stuck.
And I'll just interject there, not all clients you'll be able to move away from timesheets right now. So that was like one of the very first propositions to you. Do you go cold turkey straight away? Or do you do a gradual, like a hybrid model? Possibly there are some that you can't budge, but focus on the ones that you can and, have the courage to have those conversations and back it with examples that we're giving you today, or call in somebody to sit on your value council to help you have those negotiations. There's another question there for you, Ron, from Ben. Would you like?
I see that. The small stuff, the rats and mice stuff. Good question, Ben. I look at this and say, well, okay, this is pretty low risk stuff. So slap a fixed price on it and go down the road. You've probably got a pretty good history. This is another thing that's kind of astonishing if you think about timesheets. We say we need all this data. We have years and years, sometimes decades of data with timesheets. And yet, do we ever go back and look at them when we're like estimating a new job or a similar job? I mean, shouldn't we know what everything takes by now? But we don't, because we kind of have this attitude, well, every job's different. Every job's a black hole. But that's not true. There's an agency here in the States, Tim works with them, and they graded jobs. They used t-shirt sizes, and they said this job's a small, medium, large, 2X, 3X, if it was really complicated. And it sounds like here you're talking about small jobs, possibly medium. Just put a fixed price on it, have a minimum price, and just go down the road. Don't worry about, hopefully there's enough in there for if there's a little bit of scope creep, you have to redo something, they change their mind about something. Just, I don't see much risk pricing the small stuff. I'm much more excited when there's big, complicated projects like the large t-shirts and the extra large, where there's some unknowns. Those are the opportunities for really good pricing, really good profit, but also really creating a lot of value for the customer.
And I would go with there are two things in this particular question from Ben. So one is, if it's a big client of yours that contributes and has a lifetime value, you might be, because of your value pricing and that pricing on purpose, throwing that in for free. Like it's not for free because they've paid for it already, and you have a relationship with them to deliver. How awesome is that? This is like really different to any other agency. And alternatively, as Ron was saying and had said earlier, have a minimum price for anything that's a day or half a day, and make it your agency policy. So if it's half a day job, we'd be charging the small, medium, large. I like those t-shirt analogy. That's really easy. This is what it is for small job. This is what it is for more complex. Or if it's something that's scope creep, then scope creep or the change management form. So again, having a look at, well, what's going on here and how can you take control of it? Another big, sorry, Ron, did you want to add?
No, I was just going to say we talked about whether or not you should go cold turkey or slowly, gradually get rid of your timesheets. You can do it gradual by saying every job that we fixed priced or value price, we just don't track time on that job. And then slowly over time, your timesheets are going to vanish if you move more and more customers over to value pricing. So I think you can stop recording time when you give a fixed price in advance, whether it's value priced or just a fixed price, like on these small jobs.
It's definitely the easiest way forward. And for every business that's attending today, and pretty much every agency I've ever worked with, there is ability to fix price certain services that you do deliver, small, medium, large, 2X. And instead of tracking the time and saying, oh, we've used 2 hours more, we're just focused on the deadline and what we promised to the client. And what is it? Focus on getting that turned quicker. And I love your analysis around the annual appraisal. That is very old fashioned. None of the agencies I work with, they still do them, but they're doing OKRs, which is about KPIs and tracking those results. and they're having monthly walk and talks and quarterly check-ins. So turning it quicker, focusing more quickly on the people and what will make a difference. So that comes to the end of this session, which is all the compelling reasons why timesheets are not where it's at when it comes to pricing. Next month, we've invited Ron back to talk about now putting it into play, actually doing it. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you very much, Ron. And
thank you.
The challenge is out there for all of you. If you would like to be one of the trailblazers for VeraSage, then get in contact with me and I can share a little bit more information. And next session will be very important for you all. Great. We'll wrap it up and thanks again.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone.